What's happening, Chiefs Kingdom? I've got a special treat for you today. We're going to use a machine learning algorithm to predict what's going to happen in the 2022 NFL playoffs. So stick around and we'll show you our predictions. So typically we'll do a fan shout out at this time, but last week I talked about Damar Hamlin. Thank goodness he seems to be recovering very well. But there weren't a whole lot of comments on that video, so no fan shout out this week. But comment on this video and we'll get you rolling for next week's video, leading us up to the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. So, like we do our playoff predictions, I want to touch on the rolling points per game average allowed by the Chiefs defense. And as of week 16, they've given up just a little bit over 21 points per game, which in the NFL, once again, you saw Spagnuolo's defense have a steady downward trend after a certain point in the season. So it started in week 5. In week 5, they were giving up 25 points per game, and then they that towards a little over 21 at the end of the year. So typical Spagnuolo defensive year. One thing I want to note about Spagnuolo is that the Chiefs are 4th in sacks in the NFL, only trailing a few teams. And going into the season, everyone was really concerned about the Chiefs' pass rush, but Spagnuolo's done a wonderful job with that unit, having them get after the quarterback. So the Chiefs are 16th in points per game allowed this year defensively, but it's interesting to note that they're 7th. They have the 7th best yards per play defense in the NFL. So these two stats aren't marrying up. And if you're a yards per play guy, then you have to think the Chiefs are a top 10 defense in the NFL because that's where their stats sit. If you're a points guy, then you think that they're middle of the road. If you're a little bit of both, maybe there's some optimism there where maybe the defense underperforms statistically, and then in the playoffs, hopefully they can get it all together, put it all together, and play some of their best defense. That's what I'm leaning on. I think the Chiefs are going to play their best defense in the playoffs. And before the season even started, whenever we were talking about the draft process, I wanted the Chiefs to focus on defense with this team because I think if you pair Mahomes with a good defense, this Chiefs team becomes virtually unstoppable. No one can beat them. So if the Chiefs defense plays well in the playoffs, there's no doubt in my mind they're going to make a Super Bowl run and win the Super Bowl. If the Chiefs defense falls apart, then things get a little bit dicey. But typical Spagnuolo year, Chiefs defense steadily improved, reaching their lowest point at the end of the season. So I don't know how Spagnuolo always does this. I think 3 of his 4 years in Kansas City, the graph has looked almost just like this. I would have liked to see a sharper decline in points per game allowed, but this is what we got, so this is what we're going to roll with. Now, I mentioned at the start of our video that we were going to have a machine learning prediction for the NFL playoffs. What does that mean? Well, machine learning is just a phrase that represents giving a computer or some processing power information that they can interpret, and then after interpreting that information, they can make an educated decision. So machine learning is used everywhere in computer science, which is where my background is from. And it's typically used to make predictions or try to make some decision. There's been a lot of awesome work in machine learning over the years in healthcare industry, which is another industry I work in. And for example, they've used machine learning to analyze images, and they've been able to detect cancer earlier than a physician can. And the reason for that is because a computer can look over so many more pixels in an image or so many more data points that a human just does not have enough time to ingest. So it's kind of like giving your decisions or your thought patterns a leg up. So the machine learning algorithm that we're going to use in this video is naive Bayes. So if you're familiar with naive Bayes, it's a very simplistic machine learning algorithm. Here's basically making a prediction based on whether or not a certain class is going to happen. And I won't break your mind with this formula. I'm going to explain it in as simplistic of a way as possible. So imagine a pair of dice are rolled, and you know that every single time you roll the dice, each one of those rolls is independent of the other. So just because you roll a 6 the first time does not mean you're more likely to roll a 6 the second time. Because of that independence, you can multiply the probabilities for multiple events or multiple dice rolls, and that'll give you the probability of the total scenario. So, for example, what's the probability that you roll 2 6s in a row with a fair dice? Well, the chance of rolling a 6 the first time is 1 out of 6. The chance of rolling a 6 the second time is also 1 out of 6. To find the probability of rolling those two in a row, you multiply those two probabilities. So 1/6 times 1/6, and that gives you a probability of 1/36. What naive Bayes does is it handles the the calculations or the statistics the exact same way that the dice roll is handled, with independent events with their own probabilities, and then it has however many cases of that event happening. So in our example, I'm going to show you it's a win or a loss, and then whichever probability is more likely to happen, that is the prediction that the algorithm offers. So you know how we mentioned the dice roll had a probability of 1 out of 6. So with our naive Bayes machine learning algorithm, we need to find out what probabilities we want to use to calculate whether or not a team is going to win a game in the playoffs. So the 7 probabilities that I'm going to use, or features as they're called in the machine learning community, are: was the team playing at home in the playoffs? Did the team have a higher SRS score than their opponent? Did the team have a higher offensive SRS score than their opponent? Did the team have a higher defensive SRS score than their opponent? Did the team have a higher average margin of victory? Did they have a harder schedule? And did the team have a better winning percentage versus playoff teams? So I went back and took 5 years worth of playoff data, all the games in the playoffs, and I calculated the probabilities of the team winning given that they had a higher SRS, a higher offensive SRS, they had a better average margin of victory, and they had a harder schedule, etc. So I'm calculating these probabilities, and those probabilities worked out this way. So in the NFL playoffs since 2017, the home team has won 57.4% of their games. The team with the higher SRS score, which means they were favored, won 54.2% of the time. The team with the higher offensive SRS score won 65.5% of the time. The most important statistic heading into the NFL playoffs is that a team has good offense. In the past 5 years of the NFL, the team with the better offense has won 65.5% of the games, which that bodes well for a team like the Chiefs. So the Chiefs are great at the most important statistic in terms of winning playoff games from data collected from the past 5 years. Strangely enough, the team with the better defensive SRS score won 49.2% of their games. So that's less than half. So having a better defense is not really of the utmost importance. And I wonder if some of these numbers are fudged because the Chiefs have had some years where they didn't have a great defense and they won games in the playoffs anyways. But still, this is in the Chiefs' favor because the defense is not the strength of their team. The team with the higher average margin of victory won 55.9% of their games. The team with the harder schedule won 51.7% of their games. And the team with the better winning percentage versus playoff teams won 56.9% of their games. So the top 3 factors that a team brings into a playoff game with them are: do they have a better offense than their opponent? Are they playing at home? And then have they done better in that season versus playoff teams when they saw them in the regular season. If a team has that trifecta of stats better than their opponent, it gives them a good chance of winning. So let's take an example. So next week's wild card game between the Minnesota Vikings and the New York Giants. And looking at our statistics, there's two cases that we can go with. One case is that Minnesota wins. So that's one of our classes. Another class is that Minnesota loses. So these are the two possible outcomes in this game. In that game, Minnesota is playing at home. They have a better SRS score than the Giants. They have a better offensive SRS. They have a worse defensive SRS score than the Giants. They have a better margin of victory than the Giants. They have a better strength of schedule than the Giants. And they have a better win percentage versus playoff teams than the Giants. That we calculated before, we plug them in to our data here. And for each case where it's yes, that's our probability from our previous slide here. And in the case where it's no, you just have 1 minus that probability. So it's the opposite of that. It's the losing case. And you multiply all these against each other. So remember when we talked about the dice roll, how you know that you can multiply the probabilities of dice rolls to see how they can become connected or what the total probability is of rolling 2 6s in a row. This is the same concept for naive Bayes. You handle each of these independent statistics and you multiply them against each other, and then you're given these two values at the end. And if you remember that formula at the beginning, that probably blew up your brain a little bit. I know it blew mine up whenever I first saw it. But you have these two probabilities, and one of them is 0.017, and the other one is 0.003. What the algorithm does is it picks the value that is higher, so more likely to happen according to its calculations. And that means that this algorithm would predict wins that game. So here we have it lined green. Minnesota will win. Naive Bayes predicts Minnesota wins. And I did this for all playoff matchups. And if a team won, then I moved them up in the bracket. And if a team lost, I moved them out of the bracket, obviously. So here's what the NFC looked like whenever I did this algorithm. The Eagles end up going to the Super Bowl using naive Bayes and the handful of features that we included. The Cowboys beat the Bucs in the first round. The Giants beat the Vikings, or the Vikings beat the Giants. The 49ers beat the Seahawks. And the 49ers and Eagles meet up in the NFC Championship game. And the Eagles go to Super Bowl. In regards to the AFC, the Chargers and the Jaguars game, the Jaguars win that one. The Bengals beat the Ravens. And the Bills beat the Dolphins all in the wild card week. Then you have the divisional round, and the Chiefs beat the Jaguars, while the Bills beat the Bengals. And then this introduces that wonky neutral field playoff game between the Chiefs and the Bills. And naive Bayes likes the Bills, so it picks the Bills to win this game. And so you have the Bills and the Eagles in the Super Bowl. And this naive Bayes algorithm predicts that the Bills will win the Super Bowl. However, it's always good to, have fun with these algorithms. I must admit that there are several areas where the algorithm could improve. For instance, this algorithm didn't take into account any key injuries that a team had through the year. It didn't take into account, the other 45, 50 years of playoff games, playoff data to pull from, which you could say maybe the last 5 years is sufficient because the NFL changes so much. But there are many ways that we could improve this algorithm. And we could have added more features, as they call it. We could have added more data, and we could have refined the model more and more. So while it's fun to do this in practice, I also went through the playoff bracket and using my brain, not a machine learning algorithm, I made my predictions for the playoffs as well. So we're going to have two sets of predictions. One's the naive Bayes prediction, and then the other is the prediction from Gary's head here. So I think that wildcard week, The Cowboys and the Bucks game is interesting, but I think ultimately the Bucks offense has struggled so much this year. The Cowboys have a very good defense, although they have faltered a bit as of recent. But I think that their offense is just too much for the Bucks to handle. Even though the Bucks are playing at home, even though they have Tom Brady, I'm picking the Cowboys to win that game. And the Giants versus Vikings, the Vikings have been one of the most chaotic teams in the NFL all year. You don't know what you're going to get with them. And statistically speaking, their defense is just horrible. I think that because of their chaos, the Giants win this game. And I think some crazy things might happen, but if there's anything I could expect in this Giants Vikings game, is that it's going to be chaotic. And then you have Seahawks and 49ers. The Seahawks really feel kind of like cannon fodder. This is going to be an easy win for the 49ers, I believe. Some people have the Seahawks on upset alert to win this game, but I don't think so. I think the 49ers have handled business so well ever since Brock Purdy came into the picture that they're going to win this game handily. That would cause a divisional round in the NFC of a game between the Eagles and the Giants. The Giants' little run here wears out. The Eagles are too good. Jalen Hurts has a good game in this playoff matchup and has to handle. So the Eagles move forward. Cowboys at the 49ers in another divisional round game in the NFC. And I think this game will be closer than a lot of people might think, but the 49ers eke out a win. Then you have the 49ers at the Eagles. And this is where I believe the Eagles run into a saw. So the Eagles have had a very good year, but their schedule hasn't exactly been the toughest. And the 49ers have played a much more difficult schedule, and the 49ers are a lot hotter than the Eagles right now. The Eagles struggled in their last game whenever Jalen Hurts came back. It wasn't the easiest victory for them to finish out the year. So I think the 49ers are going to win this game between them and the Eagles, and they will be heading to the Super Bowl. In the AFC, in the divisional or the wild card round, the Chargers versus the Jaguars, of the Jaguars winning this game. I think that very under the radar, Trevor Lawrence has been playing lights out. And I saw some statistics between Trevor Lawrence and Herbert, and they were very similar. So I think that Trevor Lawrence is a rising star in the NFL, and I believe the Jaguars win this game over the Chargers. They already played the Chargers once this year, and they manhandled them, winning 38-10. I think the Jaguars win this game versus the Chargers. Ravens Bengals. I'm curious if Lamar Jackson comes back. If not, they'll be rolling. The Ravens will be rolling with the backup quarterback. The Ravens have historically played the Bengals very difficult. So I have the Bengals winning this game, but I would not be surprised if the Ravens snuck out a win somehow. So I have this game on upset alert, but as of now, if I had to, make a choice, I'm picking the Bengals to win. I do think the Bengals will win. And depending on who's starting at quarterback could make things interesting in that game. And then the last wild card round game, you have the Dolphins and the Bills, and I think the Bills handle business. Right now, we don't know who's going to be starting at quarterback for the Dolphins. I've heard reports that even their third-string quarterback, Thompson, he's been dealing with injuries. So who knows who's going to start in that game? I think it was Mike Glennon that got called up that could potentially start in that playoff game. So that's just a crazy situation. The Bills handle it, obviously, push him because of Damar Hamlin coming back. And so they win that game, and it's not even close. Then you have the Chiefs at the Jaguars, the Jaguars at the Chiefs. And the Chiefs handled the Jaguars earlier in the year. This will be the last game of the season for Trevor Lawrence. The Chiefs end up beating them, and it's not really necessarily a close game. It's a good, comfortable divisional round win for the Chiefs. Then you have the Bengals at the Bills. I love this matchup because we finally get to see what would have happened in that Monday night game that got canceled. And I think the Bengals come out on top in this game. I think the Bengals are playing some of the best football in the NFL this year. They're right up there with the 49ers as far as being hot. And I believe that the Bengals continue that stretch of winning, and they're really establishing themselves as a perennial contender in the AFC. And this just notches another this puts another notch in their gun belt, so to speak, where I believe they're going to beat the Bills, and we finally get to see what the outcome of that Monday night game might have been. So that brings us Chiefs Bengals in the AFC Championship game. Mahomes in this game comes out and he has an over my dead body game versus the Bengals, and they're able to win. The Chiefs do not have to play the AFC Championship game on a neutral field, and they have the home field advantage at Arrowhead, which we saw did matter in terms of the probability of winning. So having a home field advantage does matter in terms of winning. But I think the Chiefs beat the Bengals. It's a tight game, but Mahomes has an over my dead body game, and no one can stop him whenever he goes into that mode. And so that brings us to a Chiefs and 49ers Super Bowl rematch, and I have the Chiefs over the 49ers. Now would be a good time to comment and let me know who you think is going to win Super Bowl this year. All of us here were Chiefs fans, so Chiefs all the way, baby. But who do you think is the biggest threat to the Chiefs? Going back to this bracket, the Chiefs winning the 1 seed was huge because this means that they don't have to beat both the Bills and the Bengals. I thought whoever got the 1 seed this year is probably at a major advantage because you don't have to beat those two teams. You only have to beat one of them. And it's a lot easier to beat the Bengals or the Bills once than it is to go and beat the Bills and then the Bengals, or the Bills and then the Chiefs, or Chiefs and then the Bengals. So you only have to face one of these top 3 teams that are just incredible. And so the first round bye really helped the Chiefs. But yeah, let me know in the comments. Who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl this year? Who's the biggest threat to the Chiefs? Who do you think makes it up on the NFC side? As always, make sure you like and share this video and subscribe as well if you like what you see here. But let's get to Coach Reid's grade for 2022. So we've been going through this series where we grade Andy Reid all of every game through the season. And thus far, just to highlight back on the year, here are each of the grades that Reid received for the 17 games in 2022. As you can see, the high point for Andy Reid was the 105 he scored out of 100 in Week 7 versus the 49ers. At that time, the 49ers weren't necessarily playing great football. They didn't have the best record, but a lot of people held strong that, San Francisco is a good team. They're going to turn it around. And that was the first game they had Christian McCaffrey, and that was the best game the Chiefs played all year. So the best game the Chiefs played all year was versus probably best, if not one of the best teams in the NFL, and that's when the Chiefs had their best effort. So that's really promising if they end up meeting San Francisco in the Super Bowl again. There's something about those two teams where the dynamic benefits the Chiefs. Maybe it's scheme, maybe it's talent, maybe the Chiefs just match up well. The low point on the year was the loss to the Colts. That was a brutal loss, and that was by far Reid's worst score of the year. So taking all of these grades together and adding them together, Coach Reid gets an 83% on the year. But I don't agree with that. So there are some things I decided to do to add bonuses for Coach Reid's grade. And one of them is that the Chiefs got the number 1 seed. So I gave them 50 points for that. That really matters. They had the number 1 offense, even without Tyreek Hill. So I gave them another plus 50 for that. They had a 14-3 record. They were undefeated in the AFC West. So if you do that in your division, you're probably going to win it, and that gives you a huge advantage. So I give them a plus 25 points for that. And then they had the 7th most rookie snaps. So they were top 10 in rookie snaps. This is a very young team. And that stat was pulled as of week 13. So I gave them plus 50 points for that because that's amazing. This team did not skip a beat, had the best record or tied for the best record in the NFL while also playing a high amount of rookies. And perhaps this team is in rebuilding mode, but you can't tell because if this is rebuilding mode for this team, imagine whenever it finally gets built. And I think that rebuilding term is used with this team, and it's like owning a home, especially an older home like mine. You're constantly rebuilding. You're always going to be fixing something, always going to be working on something. And so that's how I view this Chiefs roster. I don't think that they're technically rebuilding. They're just maintaining. But some people think they are. And if you have that many rookies, maybe you are a little bit. But the fact that the Chiefs did all these things without Tyreek Hill while also playing a huge amount of rookies is an incredible accomplishment by Coach Reid. So I gave him those additional points, which grades him out at a 94% for the year. And this grade is based on Andy Reid's history. So the games he's played the years he's put forward in the past. And so I think this is another banner year for Coach Reid. Going 14-3 is incredible. With the amount of rookies he had is also incredible. And the fact that they lost one of the best offensive players in the NFL is also incredible. So the things that Coach Reid did this year with what he had, yes, there were some issues about the team winning close games, but I think all in all, the body of work that he put forward this year versus a very difficult schedule. The Chiefs, I believe, were 6-3 or 6-2 versus playoff opponents this year. So over half their games were versus playoff teams, or roughly half their games were versus playoff teams. So this is an amazing season for Coach Reid. I give him an A, and that's really all I got to say. Just great year for Coach Reid. What do you think Coach Reid's grade for the season should be? What do you think the high point was? What do you think the low point was? Do you think he should have a different grade than an A? Do you think there were other high points other than the San Francisco game? Let me know in the comments. But with that, that's all I've got. I hope you learned some good things about machine learning. Naive Bayes is kind of the good entry point into understanding how machine learning works. And the example we did was very simple, but it kind of gets the point across. Let me know in the comments, what you think of this awesome shirt that Ryan sent me. But other than that, that's all I got. Enjoy the bye week. Enjoy the playoff football this weekend. Stay safe out there. With that, this is the end of Gridiron Lines. This is Gary McKenzie signing out. Go Chiefs.
Thanks for watching this video from the team at RGR Football. Click these videos to see more and subscribe to RGR Football.